Okay, so we're going to pick up where we left off. I apologize in advance. I'm battling with a bunch of goo in my throat, so I'm probably going to cough in the middle of talking today. But it is what it is. I'll get through it eventually. I don't believe I'm contagious anymore. It's been more than a week, so I don't think I'll give it to any of you. But such as it is, my voice is what it is, and I've already been through one class today, so it's going to go downhill as the day goes on. So we're going to continue working with our plan that we were drawing for exercise 202. As you can see, it's not as though I finished it. I didn't draw in the rest of the pieces of the puzzle. But this is essentially where I need to start from today. So I'll add in more. If you missed last class and didn't have this, you're going to obviously start with drawing this, and then we'll catch you up to the 3D part. We're going to do a little bit more drawing in 2 dimensions. I'm going to explore or show you a bunch of different commands today. Then we're actually going to pull this up into the 3 dimensions, and we're going to talk through what I would consider to be one of the most important and most powerful tools that's in Rhino. It's called the project command. And so we'll spend some time working through what is the project command and what does it do. And then it is basically, it's a command that will follow you through all the way through your final project. You're going to continue using it. Today what we'll use it for is rather simple, but the complexity will increase as we go forward. So what I have is I have my basic plan that I've been working on. Before I move into 203, I'm going to do a file save as so that I keep 202, and then I'll continue working on 203. So this is exercise 203.3dm, and I'll go ahead and save it. And now I'm actually working on exercise 203. And I could go back if I needed to 202.
202, 3DM?
203.
Oh. Okay.
All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start drawing a building elevation. And if you guys remember back to the world of 130 or maybe engineering 119, we did a little bit of work, or that class did a little bit of work on standard projections and relation of plan to front elevation to side elevation. Essentially, we can draw the front elevation right here, and if we draw it flat and then rotate it into 3D, it's a lot easier than trying to draw it in 3D. So I'm going to go ahead and pull some lines as general guides, but before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about layers. And layers in Rhino are extraordinarily similar to layers in AutoCAD. So if you've worked with layers in AutoCAD, you're familiar with that. What layers allow us to do in Rhino is to separate content and then selectively turn it off or lock it, depending on what we're trying to do. It's extraordinarily useful to have layers set up in Rhino because as you move forward, certainly today, could you do everything on one layer? Yeah, because your project's not that complicated. But when you start working with complicated objects, complicated 3D objects, maybe bringing in some blocked 3D objects like as furniture or light fixtures or whatever, you can end up with hundreds of thousands of individual objects, and if you don't have some kind of control over those objects, it can be very difficult to select a particular object. So we're going to work with layers to do that. By default, in the Rhino workspace, we see properties in the right here. There is also a tab for layers, and it looks like a little pie, red, white, and blue pie. You can click on the layers button here as well to bring it to the foreground, though typically, because the size of these monitors are such, we can keep the we can keep the layers tab open over here on the right side. So in this particular file, we have a default layer, which is essentially the same as layer 0 in AutoCAD. It's the layer that just exists. The difference is we can rename it and we could actually delete it. It's not a special layer. It just is by default the default layer. And then below that, because we used a large object inches template when we created this file, we have other layers that already exist. Layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, etc. The text that represents the layers is obviously written out, which you can see. The checkbox next to a particular layer and the fact that default is bold means that that's the current layer. So if I were to draw an object, it would show up on that layer. If I wanted to change the current layer, I can click and basically move the checkbox to any of the other layers, and you'll see that that layer now becomes bold with the little check mark. Okay? Next to that, I have a column for on or off. In the world of AutoCAD, we can freeze layers or we can turn layers on and turn them off. There's a subtle difference, but that's for the AutoCAD class to discuss. For our purposes in Rhino, it's either on or off. Makes life pretty easy. Okay? Basically, if we were to turn off the default layer right now, the objects disappear. We turn it back on, the objects appear. Next to that, we have a lock, which basically, if I were to put the lock on, the lock turns blue, and I wouldn't be able, I wouldn't be able to select any of the objects anymore. I can, however, still snap to the objects. So even though I can't actually pick them up or do anything with them, they're still there, and I can still snap to them. Okay? Next to that is a column called material. We haven't really gotten to materials yet, but if you wanted to assign a material to a layer in its entirety, we could do that here. Likewise, we have something called line type. Again, pretty much irrelevant because we're not going to do any printing from the world of Rhino. We're going to be doing renderings instead. And then there are more properties, print width and print color, but like I said, not something we're really concerned with. Most of the time they live over here on the right, and a lot of you will have a view that's set up where you don't even see anything more than just the material, giving you the maximum amount of workspace. But again, it's up to you as you do that. So if I wanted to change an object layer, let's say that I wanted to take, let me unlock the default layer here. Let's say I wanted to take my floor plan, which is here. If I select it, and I right-click on the layer that I want it to go to, so in this case, layer 1, in the little pop-up menu, if I come down here, there's an option to change object layer. And when I select that, the objects that I selected will change to being on layer 01. And you'll notice that the colors change from being black to red because layer 01 is red in color. Okay? The colors of the layers are completely arbitrary. If I wanted to pick the color, right, I could change and pick a different color. The only color that I'll tell you right now don't ever pick for a layer is yellow. Gold is a little iffy too because Rhino uses yellow as a selection. So if you were to select something, you don't know whether it's the layer that's yellow or the selection that's yellow. So they really shouldn't even let you pick yellow as a layer color because it just confuses things. So just stay away from yellow. Any of the rest of the colors are fine. It's entirely up to you. Half the time you end up modeling just in black as the default color. Just because it's black doesn't mean that the object is actually black. It's kind of a dark gray. So,
right. So the default won't unlock. Why is that?
It should. Click on the lock.
Well, there is no lock or unlock.
Oh, because this is the current layer, you can't turn it off or lock it. Because it's the one that if you were to draw a line or something, right, it would show up on that layer. So it won't let you lock it because it's the current layer. Either way. Okay. It's unlocked by default because it's the current layer.
So I'm on layer 1 now, unlocked layer 1.
You're right now you're unlocked on default layer. So anything you drew would show up on the default layer.
Okay, so don't worry about what you're doing there.
No, you don't have to move it yet. I'm just walking through stuff. Yes. Okay, so if I wanted, for example, to change where it says layer 01 to actually have text, which I highly encourage you to do, I can double click on it, select the text, and we can call this floor plan, for example, which a lot of times makes things a little bit clearer so that when we're looking at a list, if it's just numbered layers, you don't really know what's on a layer. I strongly encourage you to name all of your layers. The one other thing that I will point out in the world of Rhino that is different from AutoCAD, and I think the reason that I compare this a lot to AutoCAD is because a lot of people have familiarity with AutoCAD. If you've never worked in AutoCAD, my comparisons don't mean anything to you, but for those of you that have worked in AutoCAD, sometimes the comparison is the easiest way of explaining it. The one thing that Rhino has that AutoCAD doesn't have is it can nest layers. And it kind of works like grouping layers in AutoCAD, but it's not as intuitive. Here, it's very intuitive. So I can, for example, I'm going to use layer 5. I'm going to rename this. And I'll call this layer drawing or 2D drawing, something like that. And then I can click on the floor plan layer, and I can actually drag it on top of the 2D drawing layer.
Wow, that's cool.
And it will be a nested layer. So I now have floor plan underneath 2D drawing. Let's say that I continue on. I want this layer to be south elevation, like that. I can drag the south elevation. Sorry, my mouse is having issues here.
Cool. You can group it and nest it all together like
on top of 2D drawing. Now I have south elevation and floor plan both under 2D drawing. The advantage here is that if I were to, let me draw something on the 2D drawing layer, or on the south elevation. Hold on a second. Just for clarity purposes, and make sure that there's a something on that layer. So you can see that one's in purple, my floor plans are in red. If I wanted to turn off everything that was 2D drawing, I could turn off the top layer, and it'll turn everything, oops, let me make it not the current layer. There we go, it'll turn both off. Or I can individually turn off just the south elevation or just the floor plan. So it's an increased level of control. Certainly when we get into complex objects or blocks that are coming in, you'll want to have a master layer that has the block on it, and then a bunch of sub-layers with different materials and whatever. Generally speaking, as we go forward in Rhino and V-Ray, you will assign materials by layer. So chances are you're going to have different, for like let's say we were modeling a chair. There's a pretty good chance that you'll have a chair layer, and then you'll have, you know, chair rails that are wood and chair seat that is, you know, some fabric, and you know, you can continue on, you know, the back maybe is some other kind of wood or whatever. You're going to have lots of different layers representing each of those materials. So long term, you're going to have lots and lots and lots of layers, and that's just part of the way that Rhino works in organizing files. So I like to, early on in the process, at least highlight that layers exist. Okay? As you move forward, you'll start to understand how important it is to keep track of your layers as the complexity of your drawings continue. So I now have a south elevation layer and a floor plan layer. Because I'm drawing in the south elevation now, I'm going to make sure that the south elevation is actually my current layer. So I'll make sure that it has a check mark next to it. And now that that has a check mark next to it, I'm going to go ahead and start drawing in what would represent the south elevation. And so it's pretty easy to pull it straight down from my drawing, so I'm going to draw it right here. So I already drew the first line there. I'm going to continue with another line that represents from right here. And I should have, hold on a second. Let me start that again. I'm again using my smart tracking. I'm coming down with that white line, and I'll come over with the white line until they intersect, which is going to let me have the next piece. I did 10 foot. It doesn't matter. You can do 8. This is not going to be a technical enough building to where we care how much space is in between the subfloor and the joists or whatever. Right? This is ballpark. Ballpark numbers are just fine. Okay? That's for you guys in the working drawing class to get used to. Right? Though you're probably all going to be thinking that right now, like, no, I don't have enough room in my floor cavity. Anyway, so I'm going to draw this third side, this third edge of the building here. And so I can continue on, and again, I have a habit of right-clicking to repeat the last command, but I'm just using the polyline tool over and over again. And so there's a segment, there's a segment, there's a segment, and there's a segment. So I've drawn the outline of the elevation, right? This wall right here, and this wall right here. I need to also draw in where those windows appear on this elevation. So I'm going to go ahead and just pull some large lines down from this window and use these as a guide. Right? And I have some windows here that are going to show up. Right? I could create a layer that is just construction lines so that I could delete them after the fact. Doesn't really matter. I'll delete these fairly quickly anyway. So these particular windows, I had drawn a kitchen counter. Obviously it's not there, but they're going to be a little bit higher off the ground. So maybe they'll be 4 feet off whatever the ground level is, which, again, we have a lot of flexibility in terms of how we draw this.
Now you're working in elevation.
I'm working in elevation. So mentally I've switched from working in plan to working in elevation.
Okay.
Easier to draw the elevation flat and rotated than to try to draw it in 3D. Okay, so I'm going to continue down. Let's give myself a few more guidelines. I'll go down, let's go down maybe 1'4". And I'll go down another, I don't know, 4 feet or so, something like that. And again, these are all guidelines so that I've created what the outline of this window would be. Okay, again, these are just guidelines. Once I have that, I'll go ahead and use my polyline and create a closed polyline that goes around. Now notice I'm not being able to snap to those points because I don't have my intersection snap checked. Okay? I will caution you, in 3D, intersection snap can be a little bit weird. Because we're drawing in 2D, there's no harm in using intersection. So I'll go ahead and check the box next to INT, and I'll work my way around and come back to my starting point. And I should have, at the end, a very nice closed polyline. Oh, looks like I missed one line. Try that last. Something's up with my mouse today. I apologize. So let me go ahead and join those together. I'm going to go to Edit and Join because I want ultimately a closed polyline like that. Okay? So I can take this a step further. I could use the offset command, which is available under curve, offset, offset curve. Or I could type offset. And I'm going to type a distance of maybe, I don't know, 1.5 inches to create an inner frame on that window. And maybe I wanted to divide that window up. So we'll do one more here, and maybe I'll do offset. This time, let's do a distance of 0.75. And I wanted to pick both sides in this case. And then we can delete the original. So I'm just kind of drawing what the window would look like. Okay? The only thing that's super important for today is the outline of the window. But if you want to spend a little bit of time and dress up the window, by all means. Likewise, I could put some trim around the window. So let's go ahead and do another offset, which is again available under curve, offset, offset curve. And maybe the distance this time would be 3.5. And there's some trim that goes around the outside of the window. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and delete these guidelines, and I'm just selecting them and then pressing the delete key on the keyboard. And so you can get a little bit better sense for, hey, there's a window. Okay, now I have two of these windows next to each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the first one, and then I'll copy it using a standard copy, which is available under the transform menu, copy. And I'll pick a reference point that's up here on my plan and go from this edge over here to that edge. Okay. Now it looks like my window trim intersects a little bit. So in reality, I need to do a little bit of trimming to make that stuff go away. So let me go ahead and go to Edit, Trim. And we'll trim using this as a cutting object first. And get rid of that line, and that line. And then we'll repeat the trim using that line, and we'll get rid of that, and they go together. It doesn't really matter how you chose to do it, right? I could also draw the trim separately. It's entirely up to you. But I also have two more windows over here. So let's continue with some more windows. And again, since this isn't a working drawing class, I'm not overly worried about how your windows look or what they look like. We will spend some time down the road actually building some components like windows so that you'll be able to drop them into a scene after the fact. But for right now, we're just doing kind of basics. So let me do an offset again, which is again available under the curve, offset, offset curve, or you could type offset. My distance, I'll put in at maybe 5 feet. So they're a little bit larger, these windows. Now, last time I did a polyline that snapped from intersection all the way around. Instead, I could do rectangle. It gets to the same place. So I could draw a corner-to-corner rectangle, and I'd end up with the same kind of a curve. And then let's go through and work through the same process that I did before with some offsets to make this look a little nicer. Let's go offset. This time we'll do 1.5 inches. And then maybe, I don't know, maybe I'll divide this one vertically. And again, offset, which is available under curve, offset curve. Distance, we'll do 3/4 inch. And then I'll do both sides. Oops, I have to pick this line. 3/4 inch, both sides. That. I can get rid of my original. And so now I have this window. Okay, I should probably do the trim. So let me do an offset again. So again, offset is something we used a lot last class. We're using it again for the elevation. So it's just kind of one of those continuous things that we'll keep doing. We'll do it at 3.5 inches for the distance. And we'll make a little frame around that window. Same thing. I'll select the window here, and I'll go to Edit, Copy. Oops, sorry. It's under Transform, Copy. Point to copy from. Be right here. To. Right there. And again, I have the same problem with my two windows overlapping. But let's go ahead and do a trim. Let's trim again. All right. So I have those together. I could also join these together, which is under Edit, Join, or I can type Join. Edit, Join. There we go. So essentially what I've done is I've drawn the elevation of the building. Right? Can I do more? Could I add more detail? Could I add siding? Could I add window sills and that sort of thing? Absolutely. But for what we're doing today, this is essentially what I'm looking for. Right? Very basic building elevation. Okay? I'm not worried about the roof. We'll talk about roofs a little bit later on. We're just trying to get the basics down. If you finish this elevation, you can continue on and do elevations of the other sides of your building, which is all more practice. Minimum today, we're looking for one elevation and one projection, which we'll cover in a little bit more depth in just a second. All right. So now that we have our building elevation drawn, it is all on the south elevation layer, as it should be. Right? We have our floor plan. That's all on the floor plan layer. Okay? Now it's time to actually start doing some 3D work. So thus far, we've done absolutely everything in the top view. I'm going to double-click on top. Sorry, my voice is going out. You guys, poor you guys. You have to listen to me do this, right? I'm going to double-click on top, and then I'll double-click on perspective so that I can see. Come on. Really? I thought I replaced the mouse, but clearly I'm having mouse issues. There we go. Okay, so now if we're looking at this in perspective, remember if I click and hold the right mouse button, I can orbit around my objects. Right? So I'm orbiting right now. And if we look at this, right, obviously everything to date is flat in the flat XY plane. But now we want to start bringing this up into the three-dimensional world. So I'm going to start with my elevation. And what I'll do is I'll select the elevation first. And this command takes a little bit of practice to get used to. But it's a command called Rotate 3D. And it's available under the Transform menu, Rotate 3D. Or you can type Rotate 3D. And when I click on Rotate 3D, it's going to ask me for a couple things. The first is the start of the rotation axis. And so the easiest way of kind of explaining this is if I had, let me erase this for just a second. And I'll do this several times, right? Let's say that I had an object, right? And I'm just going to color it in, okay? So if I want to take this object and I want to rotate it so that it's vertical, so that it goes like this now, right? If I want to do that, I'm going to use this Rotate 3D command. And so when it asks me for the start of the rotation axis, right, the axis of rotation is essentially this line. Okay? So when I pick the start, I'm going to pick one corner there. And then it's going to ask me for the end of the rotation axis, so I'll pick that corner there. Okay? So in the case of this plan, it's going to ask me for the start of the rotation axis. I'll pick the bottom corner here. Then it's going to ask me for the end of the rotation axis, so I'll pick that corner there. When I do that, it'll then give me this little circle that helps guide what's happening. So again, I pick this and this. It then will give me a circle around my point. And give me a little guide that's here, and it'll let me move up to this direction. Okay? So I have my ortho checked, so it'll jump at 90-degree intervals. And so I'm going to pick my first reference point, which is flat. So it's somewhere along this axis. I can pick the end point of this line, or I can pick just somewhere on the axis. Doesn't matter. And then when I jump it in that direction, you can see that it's giving me a preview of this is where I was, and I've rotated to be up in this direction. Or in this case, I'm rotated all the way around to be in that direction. Doesn't matter which way you go, right? Does that make sense? So the rotation axis is what you want to rotate around. It's the line around which you rotate. Okay? And then you choose to fold it up into the third dimension. And so now, when I look at this and I orbit around, we can see that that elevation is standing up, right? And the plan is still flat. If I were to look at my views, right? Here's my top view, right? The front elevation shows as just a line. In the front view, there's the front elevation, but I don't see the floor plan, right? And then the right side view, I see a line and a line. Does that make sense for how they all relate to one another? Okay. So now, let me go back to the perspective view. Again, I double-click to make it full size. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off the south elevation layer. But in order to do that, I'm going to have to move my active layer, or my current layer, to a different layer. So let me go ahead and check for layer 3 here. And now I'll be able to turn off the south elevation layer so that it goes away. Okay? So layer 3, I'm going to rename, and I'm going to call this walls, or I could call it 3D walls or something like that. But that's what we're going to start creating. So I just want to be clear that this is walls. Okay? And so before, I'm going to use a command called extrude to make the walls. I'm going to pull the walls up. It's essentially the same as the push-pull tool in SketchUp, but we're going to do the same thing. But before I do it, I want to look carefully at my plan. Okay? And so if I look at it here, this is a closed polyline that goes all the way around and ends at the door. If I come over here, see how this line isn't closed? It stops, and I've got some individual line segments there. Okay? I want to make sure that these are joined. So this one will extrude just fine, but this line, or these, are going to have a little bit more trouble. So I'm going to go through, and I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to select these other line segments. There, there, there. And I'm going to go to Edit and Join, or I'm going to type Join. Now, I want to pay attention to the end result after I execute the join command. So up here in my command line, it says 8 curves joined into one closed curve. That's what I'm looking for, the closed curve. If you had lines, oops, if I had a set of lines like this, and I had lines like that. See how that overlaps that in space? Right, so this one overlaps in that section. If I went to join these, 2 curves joined into one open curve. Okay? So when I go to extrude this, I'll have surfaces that overlap one another. So I want to make sure that doesn't happen. So when you're doing the join, if you end up with a join like this, where it says 2 curves joined into one open curve, you'll want to go back through and explode, and then select and say, okay, well, that one's fine. Let me join it to this one. Okay, that's fine. Let me join it to this one. Okay, that's okay. Oh, wait a minute. That one looped over itself there and there. So let's go ahead and get rid of this segment, and let's draw in, using the polyline tool, a new segment right there. So now this doesn't overlap with that anymore. So when I select, 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 and select, and I go to Edit and then Join, 5 curves joined into one closed curve. That's what I'm looking for. Okay? So if you run into trouble and they're not quite joining, go back through and I'll help you. But that's a common problem during this exercise of people having overlapping curves. So all I really care about cutting out are the doorways. The windows, we're just going to leave the way they are. Okay? So I have these 2 segments. I'm going to do them as 2 separate extrusions. but you could choose to make just one and do them both at the same time. It doesn't matter. Okay, so now I'm going to go to Surface and then Extrude Curve. So you notice thus far everything we've done has been in the Curve menu because we've been drawing just lines. When we get to 3D objects, we move over to the Surface menu, and we're going to start creating 3D objects. So in this case, I'm going to go to Surface, Extrude Curve, Straight. Okay? The command line is extrudecrv for Extrude Curve. Okay? So it's Surface, Extrude Curves, Straight. And it's going to say Select Curves to Extrude. So I'll pick this as the first curve to extrude. I'll go ahead and hit Enter when I'm done. And so now you can see that it's starting to let me pull this object up in space, which is exactly what I want. Okay? But I do want to pay attention to what the command line is asking. So we're going to get to an extrusion distance. I'm going to type in that value. But just like with an offset, I could choose to go both directions at once. I obviously don't want that. We're just going up. Okay? Now, the next option for solid, no. Okay? This means that it won't have a top and a bottom on the extrusion. This is a wall, so I want it to have a top and a bottom. So I'm going to make sure that I click on solid and make sure solid equals yes. Okay? I think I made a mistake in this extrude. Solid is yeah. No, I'm okay. They changed it. It used to be cap instead of solid, but it's now solid. Okay, so delete input would be if I want to get rid of the curves that made this in the first place, okay, which sometimes is relevant. We're going to leave it set to no because it's on its own layer. We can turn it off anyway. Okay. To boundary, we don't care about. Split at tangents, no. Set base point, no. All the rest of that is fine. Okay. So now we get back to extrusion distance. Well, I was doing an extrusion of 10 feet. Okay. Anticipating there being a little bit below the floor or whatever. So I'm going to go ahead and type in 10 feet. And so it's 10 apostrophe, and I'll hit Enter. And now we can kind of see in 3D that, yes, I have something that sticks up. Now, it would be nice, instead of seeing this in a wireframe mode, where I'm just seeing the lines representing the walls, it would be nice for me to actually see it such that it was a solid object. So I'm going to go over here to the little triangle, and I'm going to change my view mode from wireframe to shaded. Okay? Stay away from rendered for right now. We'll get to that as we go forward. Go to shaded. And when I pick on shaded, you can see that it now shows up as kind of a solid object. Okay? Sometimes it's difficult to see some of the colors. Like blue is a little bit bright. So at this point, you may decide to change from blue to like black. And black is a pretty good one to model with. I know the color says black, but the walls are light gray and the lines are black. So go figure. But it tends to be a pretty good one to kind of model with. So I just changed that color to black. Okay? So I'm going to repeat this process again. And I'm going to take this curve. That's a nice closed curve. And I'm going to go back to Surface, Extrude Curve, Straight. Okay? And we're going to go through the options here to make sure. Both sides is no. Solid needs to be yes. Delete input no, and the rest are fine. So there it is. And I can choose to type in 10 feet again, or I can actually use the wall that I just created as a reference point and just snap to that height. So we'll go ahead and do that. There. And now I end up with that piece as well. Okay? So rather quickly, we were able to create the walls of this particular little building. Okay? And so you see that I don't have the doors. The doors are just open. So I may have to go in and build a little top to each door, which I'll show you how to do in a little bit. Okay? So now that I have these extrusions done, right, it's going to be time to turn back on the south elevation. Okay? So there's my south elevation. Lo and behold, it lines up nicely. If I were to look at the south elevation, right, in the front view, we'd see that, yeah, it actually lines up pretty nicely. These two lines represent the doorway in the back. If I were to switch the front view into shaded mode, it would look a little bit better, a little bit easier to see. Okay? So there's my windows. Shockingly, they line up perfect, which is the whole idea. Now, wouldn't it be nice if there was a way to take these lines and make them show up on this surface so that I could cut out the windows, for example. Well, that's where the command called project comes in. And so we've made it down to part 5 of the handout for today. And project, for whatever reason, having taught this class for a number of years, is difficult for people to grasp at first. And then as you go along in the semesters, it starts to make a little bit more intuitive sense. And so what project does is it's essentially like a projector where you start at a place and you take some lines, and if those lines were to exist, it would cast those lines onto a surface that's behind. Okay? And so what we have to be careful of is the line through which it's going to project is always the view that you initiate the command in. Okay? And so this is the tricky part. So if I were in the perspective view, let's say something like this, and I typed project and I tried to project these lines onto these surfaces, right? The view goes straight into the screen like this, and so these lines wouldn't end up on those surfaces because they'd be projected straight. If, however, I initiated the project command in this front view, right, a straight line into the screen would take these lines and place them perfectly on the walls in this view. So I'm going to use the project command, but I'm going to start the command in the front view, not in the perspective view. So you have to make sure that the front view is the active view in order for this to work. Now, obviously, if we were projecting a floor plan onto a surface or something, we'd be in the top view. So it's not always that it's the front view. It's whatever view is perpendicular to the direction you want to project. So I'm going to make sure that front is the active view. See how front is kind of that light blue color and the other views are all gray? That means front. I can move views by just clicking on front, or I could move my mouse over and slightly zoom in and zoom out, and that would do the same thing. To me, it's easiest just to click on front, then I know front is the active view. Okay? So now I'm going to go to the project command, which is under curve from objects. I'm doing this by memory, project. Okay? Or, of course, you could type project. Okay? So curve from objects, project. Now it's going to say select curves and points to project. So the curves that I want to project would be these windows and these windows. Okay? So over here in the perspective view, we can still see what's happening, but we have to do the actual work in the front view. So I've selected the curves and points to project. I'm going to press enter when I'm done. Then it says select surfaces and polysurfaces to project onto. Right? So these are the surfaces that it's going to throw new lines on, which, no surprise, would be this surface and that surface. Okay? And so you can see what I selected over here. But again, I made the selection in the front view. Okay? So now that I'm done, I'll go ahead and hit enter. And you'll see that it will take these lines and it will throw them across each of these surfaces straight through the building. Now, because this was a contained poly surface, right, it threw the lines on this wall over here and gave me a half of a window. Okay? Now, if I had drawn the elevation on the opposite side, right, I wouldn't worry about this using this window, okay, because I do the project the opposite way. So let me go ahead and I'm going to delete those lines because I don't need them. And I'm going to turn off my south elevation. I'm going to make perspective large. And we can now see that these lines, right, are in fact on the surface. Not only that, they're on the front and they're on the back of that surface too, because it goes all the way through. Okay? So let me repeat that one more time just to make sure people got it. Okay? So I'm back here. And again, I have to make sure that I'm doing this in the front view. Okay? I'll go to curve from objects, project. Select curves and points to project. It would be this window and that window. Perfect. Looks like I accidentally picked a curve that's way back here. We'll get rid of that. Okay, so I have this window and that window. I'll go ahead and hit enter. Oh, I have to make sure I'm in the front view. And then select surfaces to project onto. It would be this surface and that surface. And then I'll go ahead and hit enter. and it will project through in a straight line to each of these surfaces. So again, I don't want this one in the back here, so we'll get rid of that. Make that go away. But in this case, I do want these, so we'll leave those. Okay, so we'll go ahead and we'll turn off the south elevation layer. I'm going to have to figure out this mouse situation. All right, so now we're starting to look at this. So once we get to this stage, right, this is what is most critical for you to get to today. Okay? I'm going to show you some more stuff moving on, because those of you that feel like you want to keep pushing this, I want to give you some more tools. But this is the expectation for today, is that you get to this point. Okay? If you get to this point by the end of class, you can go to the little triangle, go to Capture to File, exactly like we did last class. Create an image of this, and this will be your record of what you did today. Okay? But I want to take it further for those of you that feel comfortable and want to keep pushing this a little bit more. Right? I would also encourage you to draw the other elevations and do the same thing with the projections from the other elevations as well. So let's say that I'd like to cut out holes where these windows go. Okay? I have two different options for how to do it, and I'm going to show you each option as we go forward. Okay? So the first one, I'm going to use just the trim command, which we've done before. And I'm going to select the outer window here on this side, and I'll select the outside of the window on this back side, like that. And then I'll go ahead and type trim, or go to Edit, Trim. Select Object to Trim. I'm going to get rid of the surface and the surface. And so we now see that I have a hole that goes through that where that window was. Okay. Once I'm done, I'll press Enter to finish. And I need to, if I look very carefully, see how there's like a hole in between? Right? I need to fill that in. So with these two curves still selected, I'll go to Surface and then Loft. The defaults are just fine. I'll go ahead and hit Enter. And I'll say OK. And so now it's been filled in. So I actually have a surface that goes around on the inside here. See that surface? Okay. So it's a little confusing because there's more curves from that projection that are still hanging out here. But essentially, I was able to cut through and create this part of the window. Okay. So let's say that I wanted to add some window trim. Well, let's finish off with this window. Let me trim it again. I'll take this curve. I'll hold down Shift, and I'll take that curve. I'll go to Trim again. So it's under Edit, Trim, or I'll type Trim. There and there. We can now see through. Enter when I'm done. And then I'll go to Surface, Loft. Enter and Enter. I now have a line that goes through there as well. Okay. So again, if this starts to be a little too advanced, you don't have to get here today. I just want to show you that this part works. Okay. So the alternative to that is a command that's available underneath the Boolean union tool, which is the two spheres that are joined together. Okay. If I click and hold, oops, helps if I'm on the right tool. If I click and hold, there's a tool for Make Hole, right, which is right over here. It's kind of a solid wall. It looks like a wall with a little window in it. Okay. When I do that, it's going to say Select Planar Closed Curves, which would be this curve. Okay. I'll go ahead and hit Enter. Select a surface or polysurface. I'll select my wall. And then it's going to say Select Depth Point, which I'm going to need to pick something on the back side of this window, something like right about there. And it will do the whole operation in one. So it'll cut through my wall and just push the window through. Okay? This is the easiest way by far of creating these. Okay? The problem is you have to make sure that the curve is a closed joined curve. Now remember, when I drew the windows, I made sure that the outside was a closed joined curve. So assuming you did that, this will work as well. Okay? If it isn't, you have to go through and join them together. Okay? Because as part of the command, you'll see, by the way, it's Make Hole if you type it. Okay? It says Select Planar Closed Curves. So it has to be a closed curve, and they have to be in the same plane for it to work. So there it is. We'll go ahead and select that again. Select surface or polysurface, be right there. Select depth, would be on the back side here, and it cuts right through. Okay? So my hope is that you'll be able to get all of your building elevations done. You'll be able to do projections from all directions, and you'll be able to cut through the windows. If you want to keep embellishing or pushing further or extruding more of your furniture or whatever, by all means, do that as well. But we'll continue with the same building. We'll deal with some materials and stuff as we go forward. So when you're done, again, make sure that you go to the little triangle and you go to Capture to File to create your JPEG image for what you're posting today. Okay? But then also make sure you save your work as exercise 103, because you're going to need this file again for exercise 104. Any questions? One or two what? Two. Sorry, 204. Yep. Sorry. So in my classes, there's a way of separating them. This one's always the 200s. Everything starts with a 2. The morning is always the 100s, or the 135 is always the 100s. It used to be Digital Tools 1 and Digital Tools 2, hence the 1 and the 2, but it's changed a little bit. So just make sure it is, in fact, 2. All right. Any other questions? No? Good. I'll turn you loose.